Good morning to everyone. This is Annalisa Camilli. I'm a journalist and I'm working at the Italian news magazine Internazionale. I'm very happy to moderate this panel discussion about the G20 and the role of women in rural areas. We will try to understand which are the challenges and opportunities for gender equality. We will have a very rich panel discussion with a lot of panelists coming from all around the world. But before starting, I will leave the space to Maria Grazia Pannunzi, President of AIDOS, the Italian Association for Women in Development and coordinator of the C20 Gender Working Group, because she wants to greet us and to introduce this panel discussion. Please, Maria Grazia.
Thank you, Camilla. Thank you, Annalisa, sorry. And yes, so welcome everyone. I am Maria Grazia Pannunzi and the President of AIDOS and coordinator of the Gender Working Group, along with my colleague Mabel Bianco. The Gender Working Group is tasked with providing a gender analysis of the G20 process. And at the same time, a specific attention on women and girls' rights was also brought forward. All the work that we did during this year of the Italian presidency of the G20 can be found in the C20 website. In this second day of the C20 Summit, one of the most important activities of the C20, one of the official engagement group of the G20, the Gender Working Group thought it would be of great interest to organize an event on the challenges and opportunities facing women and girls in rural areas in terms of policy and action to achieve gender equality. Women and girls in rural areas experience a unique set of problems and discriminations that are often neglected, as well as directly facing the consequences of economic system that puts profit at the center, following a logic of exploitation, starting with the environmental resources, just to mention the economic sphere. In the rural environment, the issue related to the respect of human rights, access to health, education, wash, the impact of climate change are amplified. We consider this event important, firstly because it will bring a South feminist analysis to the entire G20 process and will provide a recommendation for G20 governments. Then, speaking about the G20 work, although two G20 official documents, the Matera Declaration and the Agriculture Ministerial Meeting Communiqué, released in September, mention the importance of empowering women and girls in rural areas. But concrete action are missing. Without concrete action, roadmaps, indicators, and resources, the declarations remain rhetoric. So let's listen to our speakers that will bring us a concreteness and commitment. Thank you and enjoy the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Maria Grazia. Let's start then this panel discussion that will explore how women and girls in rural areas can best benefit from international financial institutions, rural infrastructure investments, and how their meaningful participation and engagement in development can contribute to gender justice, the empowerment of women and girls, and the realization of their human rights. Now it is, I will leave the space to Pumpa Dewi from Indonesia. Diwa Puspa is working at EXI, that is an NGO involved in gender, social, and ecological justice. It's a feminist organization that monitors development and climate finance. She's also on the board of the NGO Forum on ADB and has done extensive work on monitoring large development projects funded by AFI, and also have demonstrated expertise in climate justice and rural livelihood. Therefore, please, Pumpa Dewi, it's your time.
Okay, thank you, Annalisa. You can hear me clearly? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good day, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone. I'm Dewi. I'm from Indonesia, and now I'm working with AXI for Gender, Social, and Ecological Justice. So the feminist organization who that we are the advocate monitor for the development and climate finance. And thank you for a great day, great opportunity for me to share our experience to see how the impact for the women in the rural area, because the large infrastructure, large scale funded by international finance institution. So I will share my presentation. I try to quick because the limit of the time, yeah. So I will start with what the women say, yeah, because the AXI we work with the women in the grassroots and the rural area, and we have the research, we have the strengthening for them to make empower for the women's situation. So this is what they say. Yeah, the first in the Kedung Ombo Reservoir, what is the situation? They say that the land and garden have sunk. Finally, I make a living by looking for rencek wood. Is like the specific wood in that area, and then they're selling it. And the women in the Wadas village, yeah, Central Java, they facing with the now the construction of the mining. They said that we don't want mining in our village. Mining will take our away our living space and deprive us of the source of our livelihood as a women farmer in the Wadas village. And also the women in the who live around the Mount Slamet, where is the geothermal project there? Yeah, they said that we can no longer use clean water. Yeah, we can we cannot longer use the river water and tap water because very dirty. Yeah, and mixed with mud since the operation of the geothermal project. So this is only what is a small part of the many story of the women in Indonesia who they live around the large scale project in Indonesia. So why this situation impact or what is why this is happening in Indonesia? Because now we see the agenda of the Indonesian government. So the second what is the second period of the Jokowi president of Jokowi, yeah, they have the agenda of the what is the focus, yeah, for the investment large scale. So the development, they have agenda, yeah, who focus in investment. We can see in Indonesia, yeah, our government, they are make a bill what is the policy, investment policy, so many investment policy. And in 2020, our government there make the law, yeah, we call the omnibus law on job creation, and this is mostly their they create how to easy for the investment, yeah, and the other, hello. Okay, so in other what is the agenda of Indonesia, because they are focused for the investment large scale. Our president there make policy, yeah, about national strategy project policy, yeah, through the presidential decree, and a concern, and mostly, yeah, this policy also about the investment. So they put what is mining or renewable energy project, yeah, in that issue, yeah, part of the national strategy policy project. And of course, because they are focused on the investment, the government also they build state-owned company, yeah, have the what is we call the PT Sarana Multi Infrastructure and PT Indonesia Infrastructure Finance. And in the PT Indonesia Infrastructure Finance, one of the support by ADB, yeah, and the other we can see many the project support by the international finance institution like the World Bank, ADB, Islamic Development Bank, and also the AIIB in Indonesia. So one of the issue now about the renewable energy, World Bank and ADB, they are have the what is give a loan for the our government to what is to develop the strategy of the geothermal. So they give a loan around $250 million, yeah, to what is to build, to develop the what is the geothermal project in Indonesia. And we can see what the impact of this large-scale project in Indonesia. This is I what is resume from the several situation or project in Indonesia who impact for the women. The first year we can see the women still what is there is no clear information, yeah, so many project of the investment there is not get the information for women clearly what the impact this project for the women, yeah, there is no consultation, even there is no concern in a community about the project. And the other, we can see many project impact for the land acquisition process was not carried through discussion and agreement about the land price. Yeah, we can see the land grabbing, eviction, yeah, lack of access to water resource, and we can see in the what is the geothermal project, yeah. And this is also impact for the loss of the women's local knowledge and wisdom. Loss, of course, this is also what is the impact for their income and livelihood. And because the government, they use the military for what is to security the investment. So we can see how the conflict, horizontal intimidation increase in the community and also for the women. And now we can see the criminalization and lack of democracy also the increase in Indonesia. Amnesty International, they are raised the number of the criminalization in Indonesia. So in 2020, around 248 what is the human rights defender, and include the women's human rights defender, they get the criminalization from our government. And of course, this is in line, yeah, increasing gender injustice. We can see how when the water resource lows, yeah, this is of course impact for the women's work in the domestic work. Yeah, and we can see how this is make the women's what is more get the violence, yeah, violence and violation, yeah, because this project in that area. So we know the G20. They are discussed about the how infrastructure, how the large-scale project will happen in the member of the G20, and we know how the women's now still hard to raise their issue, their situation. So we are what is we call for the forum G20 should do. First, yeah, should be acknowledged and address the problem faced by women as the impact of the large-scale investment project, and also by funded by the international finance institution. And because in international standard, we have the what is the instrument for the women's protection. So the G20 forum should be a forum to ensure and promote values of the humanity, human rights, justice, and sovereignty for the women. Because we can see how this large-scale project, they're what is they take the women's sovereignty, they take the women's knowledge, and they are what is not to put the women's experience in the table when they discuss and what is make a decision. So we must to push this forum must be involve the representative involve women in that decision making process. So I think enough. Yeah, this is. Yeah, we are still fight for justice and sovereignty for the women, and we believe because we have opportunity to build our network. We can build the strong network to connect each country, how to make a movement, women movement, feminist movement to reclaim our sovereignty. Thank you. Thank you, Annalisa.
Thank you, Puspadiwi. I should ask the other panelists to keep the intervention shorter. Please don't go over 5 minutes intervention, because we have many panelists, and we don't want to we want that everyone could speak and could have their time. Now I will introduce the second panelist of this first session, talking about women in rural areas and large infrastructure development projects. I will introduce Preeti Daruka from India. She is a gender policy expert and a human rights defender from the Global South, with over 25 years of experience working at international, regional, and national level. Preeti is the founder and executive director of a program on women's economic, social, and cultural rights. And she's also a co-founder of Feminist Land Platform and the founding member of SAFA, South Asian Feminist Alliance. Preeti co-founder and coordinator of BRICS Feminist Watch, an alliance of feminist organizations from BRICS countries. Therefore, please, Preeti Daruka, join our panel session. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Annalise, and thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be in this space and to share the work we have done as BRICS Feminist Watch in monitoring large infrastructure projects. We have monitored 3 infrastructure projects in India. In interest of time, I'm going to particularly stick to the one we monitored on rural roads in India, which was funded by AIIB Bank. So what we found was, of course, there's, as the SDG preamble says, there's no sustainable development without gender equality. And all the IFI's policies have this in some form or the other. However, we found that gender doesn't get fully integrated into development projects. The existing prevalence and persisting gender equality rooted in social norm and culture, as well as economic inequalities, do not allow gender to be integrated in design, planning, execution, monitoring of these development projects. The general assumption with infrastructure projects is that the project assumes a gender neutral approach. For example, with the road project that we monitored, which was funded by AIIB in rural Gujarat in India, the general assumption is that it's a road project. Once roads are built, it will help everyone. But that's not true. In a lack of course, we understand the lack of roads severely impact local people, especially women, as mobility is restricted, inconsistent, and inconvenient. Travel is costly, time-consuming, which takes a toll on human capability and opportunities. Road infrastructure is not only for economic growth, but there's also can be a key instrument to address the rural-urban divide, improve quality of life by addressing isolation, resulting in better exposure to opportunities and resources. Rural roads connectivity does play a role in improving men's economic productive role and women's economic, domestic, and community management roles. So the roads are helping men's economic opportunity, whereas for a woman, it's not just economic opportunity, it's also domestic as well as community management role that women play, and rural roads play a very important role. Therefore, it's really important that development projects, especially for infrastructure like roads, do an in-depth analysis and assessment of women's needs and physical usage of infrastructure. It's important to understand the different gender impacts as well as gender needs of these infrastructure. So rural road connectivity also need to go beyond just taking into account the usual gender sensitive issues of health and education. So as soon as you bring gender in the infrastructure conversation, it will get limited to, of course, access to health and education services. But rural roads, especially in rural areas, in addition to providing access to health and education service, also impacts women's work, both paid and unpaid, and livelihood by providing access to markets, employment opportunities, and other resources. In absence of adequate social infrastructure, rural women spend a lot of time on unpaid work that includes toiling on family farms, post-harvest processing of agriculture products, collection of free goods, including water, fuel, fodder, maintenance and care of household. All these things women do, which come under unpaid work or some of the livelihood options, and road can reduce this burden that women carry. Women also engage in several livelihoods and income generating activity. Therefore, road connectivity impacts women's both paid as well as unpaid work. Research also shows that men and women use different roads as well as use roads differently. While men mostly use the roads to travel outside the village, it is women who use internal village roads for commuting to fields, markets, schools, and public utilities. Women use roads for family, community, and social maintenance tasks. They also travel for livelihood opportunity, for fetching fodder, water, firewood, Women tend to make frequent and numerous short trips to fields, schools, nearby villages. Women are primarily head load carriers. They will carry, like if they're carrying fodder, they're carrying farm produce, they will carry on their head. And they will walk on the shoulder or sidewalks or use free or non-motorized transport. Women also use public transport but rarely take motorized transport for personal use. Due to gendered aspect, a woman's time has less value. Hence, women usually walk or take less expensive means of transport, which are time consuming and tiring. This is huge time burden that women carry, which prevent them from engaging in other productive work. So these are things which we found in the road project. This gender dimension of rural women's reality was not included. So though the huge millions of dollars were spent on building these roads, but it definitely benefited men more than it benefited women, and hence it resulted indirectly in increasing the gender gap. So women, we were found still were walking on these roads, were carrying the burden on their heads. There were no access to, like, they are not using motorized. So now we have traffic zipping at 60 kilometers an hour on these rural roads, which has become more dangerous for women to walk on the along this. So what is it that, how can G20 or all these countries who are investing in infrastructure be mindful of, first is, of course, we draw the substantive equality framework from CEDA and we say, go beyond the formal equality model, that same input will give you the same output. So roads do not, just by building roads does not mean that they will benefit men and women equally, unless and until you bring that gender dimension into the very planning as well as monitoring and implementation part of it. It's really important, therefore, to have different corrective measures. For example, if you want women to participate in consultation, it is important when these infrastructure projects are being discussed at community level, you have flexible time which allows women to, which are suitable for women participation. They have separate women only consultation, have women facilitators. Be mindful of the cultural limitations in which these rural women are working and existing. So therefore, it's really important to bridge gender gap. Policymakers and IFIs funding large infrastructures such as road should ensure equal access to opportunity, both economic, including work within the project, social, including health education, knowledge, information about the projects for women, women's full participation in all aspects of the project, and projects should have clear gender indicators beyond just mitigating risk. So as soon as we bring gender issues, most of the IFIs look at gender as a doing some harm kind of a approach, as opposed to having a proactive approach to addressing long-term inequalities and proactively doing some good to bring gender equality and gender justice in their project. The project should have clear indicators in addressing gender equality, and it should capture how the project is going to benefit women in their day-to-day life, in asset building, in livelihood creation, in procurement, in employment, and in addressing harmful practices. The project should also have robust grievance mechanisms to ensure equal access to justice. Please, and women are aware of
Daruka, that. Keep your time is finishing, so please.
No, I want to end here, and I want to thanks Annalise for pointing out. I'm sorry if I went overboard. I can end here. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Now we will talk about the relationship between women in rural areas and renewable energy. Energy is an important resource that is needed for both livelihoods and domestic purposes. With commitment and huge investment made by all states towards renewable energy. This panel will explore how this can impact women and girls. Therefore, I will introduce Govin Kelkar from India, Govind Kelkar is a scholar, a PhD. She has reached a PhD in political economics of China. She's a visiting professor at Council for Social Development and in Institute for Human Development in India. She's also the executive director of GEND, the Center for Research and Innovation and in India, and she was a senior advisor at Landisa at Seattle in US. In our current assignment, Professor Kelkar was the International Research Coordinator of Energia International. Therefore, I welcome Govind Kelkar, and also I recommend to keep her intervention shorter. Thank you.
Friends and colleagues, greetings. So I'll definitely try to be short or shorter. So I am going to talk about women in rural areas in India with attention to India and renewable energy. Feminist analysis show, and I won't go in detail, two things in particular. One is that energy plays an important part in social action for change in gendered spaces. I mean, we have seen that all these spaces are gendered and how the kind of a change it can make in terms of through the energy intervention. And second is that energy policy must respond to the context of market-driven, or what we call as globalized and culturally enforced patriarchal forces. So in other words, I'm talking of two forces. One is the cultural systems in our own countries, and the other is the globalized world or globalization that has impacted. So in this presentation, keeping in kind of in the limited time, I will talk in brief about the two renewable and clean energy projects in India with attention to South Asia and others. One is that India's partly subsidized LPG program. LPG is the liquid petroleum gas program for clean cooking energy. There is a deficit in clean cooking energy. And limited attention has been paid to it even in this energy decade. We know that. So just because it is a woman-centered kind of cooking system. The government of India responded to it, call it as Ujjwala scheme or PMU by Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. So this is a kind of tongue twister. And it was said that what is important about this clean cooking energy was that about the government committed to provide 50 million LPG connections to below poverty line households. But what was important in this was done that connections were given in women's name, whether they were married or they were single or they were abandoned. So civil status of women was not taken into consideration. It was partly subsidized, which I can take in question answers. Almost 50% government paid the money and 50% came to the household paid the money. This was in 2016. In about by February 2020, the reported or earlier, that number has increased to 80 million, from 50 million to 80 million, and now it is even more. And of course, the government claims that it has covered all the household. So what are the really and what were the objective of this policy? And within these objectives, you see the hidden challenges and some overt challenge, not only hidden. The objectives were to empower women and protect their health. 1.3 million children and women in particular die, and their infants die because of the indoor air pollution. So WHO data shows that kind of thing. To reduce, second objective was to reduce serious health hazards associated with cooking with solid biomass, wood, dung. These were the kind of solid biomass cooking which caused this indoor air pollution. And to reduce the number of deaths due to unclean cooking fuels, and to prevent growing children from acute respiratory illnesses. So these were some of and indoor air pollution also to check. What were the challenges that in this so-called internationally known, and the government of India receiving a lot of kind of achievement award for this kind of policy. The challenges were two. One was that persistence of high proportion of rural households are still using solid biomass as a primary fuel, and not in the, even when partly subsidized. And second, this is a 2020 survey shows, and 21 also. Despite having the LPG connections, it is put aside. So that is one challenge. Second is the drop in LPG refills by poor rural households through the year 2018. Now, what does this shows is that there is kind of low valuation of women's work and time. It is not considered. They can do anything that is considered. Their values, the rural women in particular, that labor is not valued. It seems that they have enough time to do anything. So introduce any scheme and don't bother about the time. Affordability, they are not able to afford the households. Accessibility is the problem in remote rural areas. And men's control over household finances and assets like land and housing, and cultural norms and practices that repeatedly reinforce these attitudes and also limit the implementation of the policy. So this is, one has to see, even in G20 countries, when we come to conclude this kind of thing, that it is really not the policies being made. Policies to be made, how they are implemented and how they are seen as a kind of monitored with gender indicators and with the implementation indicators, how they are benefiting. My second, and I have done the research in this, my second example is women in the solar sector, solar energy. And government of India is the kind of leader of the International Alliance for Solar Energy. So internationally level, I've taken these two examples in order to say that when there is a kind of these best practices which are projected, how in the best practices the hidden question of gender and gender relations are involved. What are the factors that low representation of women? In India, only 11% of the women are in the workforce in solar sector, while internationally 32% women are there in the solar sector. So this is the kind of, even as workforce, I mean, not even as managers would be very, very limited. Factors that determine low representation of women in the workforce include lack of access to opportunities, safety and security. When you ask that, why don't you go to workers? I was in a village in rural areas, and a woman told me, oh, the men are standing with their bottles, and bottles are the kind of liquor and then the associated violence they were talking about. And the violence not within home, but outside in public spaces also. Patriarchal perception of women's capabilities. Other thing, women are backward, they don't know anything. So that is another factor that determines. Third is insufficient resources for skill acquisition. There is a huge program for skill development, but when women are included, they are included for sewing, cooking, and so on and so forth. These are which are non-commercial activities, and they cannot do resources. Women don't have the kind of finances under their control. They are dependency of the women subsumed within the household, and failure to factor in awareness among employees and management about gender inclusivity and gender parity in the workforce. So when I said that women are not there, I visited studying a company, I won't name it, but which has not a single woman. And when I asked them, then I'm giving an example of a very successful company in India, solar company, and say that company has done so well without...
Telkar, I should ask you to close your intervention, please.
Sure. I would do in 1 minute, or you want me to close now? Okay. So despite these problems, there are some good examples, and good examples really are talking of that self-help groups. If you have heard of women's collectives in rural areas, they have been set up manufacturing unit. Women have been trained. These are illiterate women. They have been trained. Second is that how to manufacture kind of solar panels. They have been trained, and there are many African women go there in this barefoot college, and they also learn in the same area where I am talking this. So I would end it here, but in terms of the time, thank you. Just one line I wanted to say, what G20 countries need
Thank
to
you.
do.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Now we will introduce the third session of our panel discussion about women in rural areas and the issues of land and livelihood, and also the criminalization of women's rights defender. I will leave the space to Fabiana Menna that will introduce the issue. She's from Argentina. She's the president of Fundación Gran Chaco, a leading organization in development of proposal, innovations, and solutions for the socio-environmental sustainability of the region. Fabiana has a strong gender equality record, and in particular, she works in the north of Argentina with rural indigenous women. She has been also a delegate of the W20 since 2018, and she promotes the incorporation of the indigenous women leader as members of the Argentinian W20 delegation. Please, Fabiana Menna, join our panel discussion. Thank you.
Gracias, Annalise. Voy a hablar en español.
Thank you. I will speak in English, in Spanish. So I would like to share with you the experience that we carried out in Argentina, and namely in with indigenous people living in rural areas, because actually the greatest number of indigenous people in Latin America, in Argentina, is based on the Chaco region. And as you can see, we have 60% of indigenous people living in Argentina, which is the situation in these territories, in these regions, with respect to women. So if we take into account the situation that we can find, we can see that women are more vulnerable, and when we take into account domestic the situation at local level, we can see the level of vulnerability. For example, illiteracy, you can see the percentages here. So we can see that the Chaco region, in which we can find the highest number of indigenous people, we can see that the 55% of indigenous women living in Chaco have the problem of illiteracy. So thanks to these figures, we can see which is the situation of women living in this region, indigenous women living in this region. So which is so we have a very high level of vulnerability with respect to land property. According to the last study, we have 16.2% of land property for women, and we have a very important gender gap when it comes to access to internet, for example. And women living in rural areas make up 43% workers, so they play a major role in ensuring the livelihood of their families, but on the other hand, they do not have access to land property. So figures are really important, but I think that we have to take into account the positive side, because actually women are not only not only as vulnerable persons, vulnerable people, but women has actor playing an active role, because if women had the opportunity to have access to the same resources as men, we had the opportunity to increase the GDP by 14% by 2030. So we have visited this region from and we had two standpoints. So equality policies, and also we have to take into account the climate change, because actually development should be based on the problems, on the issues related to climate change. And also we have to take into account that gender mainstreaming this framework entails innovation. So we have to set a premium on change and imagination, creativity, which are the strategies that should be implemented. Poverty reduction, so economic emancipation, and also we have the need of having public policies, and the key component is related to the strengthening of the situation of women. So we have to go beyond the fragmentation of the social fabric. We have to improve women's skills in order to carry out innovation initiatives at the local level. So here you have the example of a network that we have created in the north of the country, and with in order to carry out actions. But we can say that so the goal is to strengthen the network at local level, national level, and international level. So there is a broader network encompassing the civil society, NGOs, and different NGOs at national and international level, and also strengthening these rural networks. So starting from 2020 in Argentina, we have created a rural network in order to strengthen the dialogue between the local networks and the national government in order to improve the situation. So we can see that the main goal is poverty reduction. We have to strengthen the productive system at the rural level. So the productive system is not based on a single sector, because we have a complementarity of the productive system. For example, we carry out actions in different field, and also, for example, craftsmanship, and so all the forestry related activity, and livestock, and also you have another, for example, here you have the production of this product, and sometimes we have to import, even if we can produce these products, we have to import them. and also the potential in generating revenues at the local level. But we set a premium on agriculture, which is of utmost importance, and also we want to go beyond the agricultural sector in order to exploit all the potentials that we have for digital innovation by using the internet, the technological tools, in order to valorize the local production, in order to boost women and women's situation and in the rural areas. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's now the turn of Patricia Chavez from Brazil. I know that she should leave, therefore I invite her to speak. I hope she is still with us. Please, Patricia.
Sim, bom dia. Eu tenho muito pouco tempo porque eu tenho
very little time because I have to go chair a meeting in a few minutes. So I will be very quick. First of all, I would like to thank you because for us from Brazil, having this opportunity during this political crisis is very important, especially since we can talk about the situation of rural women in Brazil. So in the very little time I have, because actually I will have to go in a while, I just want to highlight 4 questions. First of all, the one which is clear to everyone, that Brazil is going through a deep democratic crisis, an environmental, climatic, and monetary crisis as well. The authoritarian government is threatening the poorest among the people, especially Black people, indigenous people, Quilombola people, Ribeirinhas people, and LGBTQ+, and the government is also threatening the rights we have gained along with the constitutional process in 1988, which was the result of a struggle, which was, of course, participated by the feminists and the civil society as a whole. So all of these rights are being threatened by now by a government which is denying science, as you all know, and which is also trying to destroy our institutions by threatening and jeopardizing our democracy, and among all, by authorizing the persecution and murder of human rights advocates. So the government is authorizing and actually incentivizing the destruction of our forests, not just the Amazon, but also the various biospheres and bio areas we have in our country, with changes in legislation which are basically dismantling our institutions. Rural women and their lands in Brazil, it's very important to understand that Brazil is one of the countries with the highest urbanization rates. 82% of our population lives in cities, and just 18% of our population still lives in rural areas. And this is very important, and it's very important to understand that urbanization was done in a very quick and disorganized way, where the population was actually put at risk, and people who left the rural areas to go to the city, to go live in the slums, because everybody knows about the slums in Brazil, not just in Rio de Janeiro, but in all big cities. But there's also another issue, and a huge one, and this is also connected to what we are discussing today. That is the issue of women who are living in a very precarious manner in the outskirts of small and medium cities. They are absolutely insecure in terms of land possession, be it urban land or not, and they are really struggling or are insecure in terms of access to land. In this context, women are suffering both from bad living standards and security standards, as well as from the lack of health measures, because you know that during the pandemic, a part of Brazil started believing that there is a huge rate of the population that is resistant to public policies and to the government, and this is invisible because policies are not actually reaching them out. There are marginalized people, and their basic rights are entirely failed. And these women, among them, are both in cities and in the outskirts of cities and in rural areas, but in small and medium cities as well, as I said before. So what we are discussing, so aside from the whole matter of informal work, so the lack of guarantees for minimal food standards for families and households, and then there is the question of taking care of families, which also prevents women from taking care of themselves during the pandemic, and for instance, doing what they were required to do, that is social distancing. So if women had to go out to work, they were actually putting their own life at risk. And the decision was between dying of hunger or being food deprived, or dying because of the pandemic, because they had to go out and find food for their families. And this is without prejudice to another issue that we're dealing with, especially in rural areas, which was violence against women. We had basically a second pandemic, which was the pandemic of domestic violence against women, and we had seen a stark increase in femicides. In a country where there's a strong concentration of the land, such as in Brazil, where land possession is 10 hectares on average, and there was a reduction, by the way, because this is just 2.2% of the overall land at a national level, as opposed to large landowners and large lands. So today, we are facing a situation of poverty, misery, and lack of food. Our most vulnerable people, and those would be women, Black women, right? So they represent 19 million people. They don't even have, how to say this, what to eat. So they are basically gathering rests of food to feed themselves with. There are no policies for them, and at the same time, there has been a dismantling of public policies that we've had. So we need to understand that today we are focusing and we are facing a government which is overtly and openly, at an international level too, who's defending the dismantling of forests, so deforestation, the increase in agribusiness, authorizing the use of weapons, especially for children. It's incentivizing children to use weapons to kill human rights advocates, to guarantee their supreme right in their mind, which is that to private property, as opposed to something that for us is fundamental, which is the access to land to produce food. And this is the women's role traditionally.
Should close your intervention, please.
Eu tenho que sair. Muito obrigada.
So I have to go. Okay, I have to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your intervention. Now there is the last session. Unfortunately, Berta Cáceres from Honduras could not join our panel discussion. And And then there is the last session of our panel about the access of women in rural areas to services, and also the way how to reduce the risk of gender-based violence. We will talk about this issue with Sibulele Poswayo from South Africa. Sibulele is a seasoned gender specialist and social entrepreneur. She currently works as a resource mobilizer at the Border Rural Committee and is at the helm of the inequality movement, which is a social movement formed in the Eastern Cape. Please, Sibulele, join our panel discussion, and please remember that you have 5 minutes intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Great stuff. Good afternoon, 2:30 in South Africa, and I would just like to make an intervention around gender-based violence and the impact it has on our women, but more so is to provide solutions. We don't like to just engage on complaints and diagnosing challenges and problems, but to provide solutions. And so our concentration is really going to be on the impact that a UN treaty like the CEDAW will have on the impact of gender-based violence, as well as violence against women and the girl child. As a movement working closely with communities at grassroots level in South Africa and the South, we chair the Civil BRICS Gender Equality Working Group, and we are an active member of an amazing group of feminists across the BRICS, which is the BRICS Feminist Watch. Our focus is on the girl child, her mother, and or her caregiver, or those who identify themselves as women, their community-based organizations, as well as their business entities. And so this presentation is made in the auspices of COVID-19, and the purpose of the presentation is to bring to light South Africa's continued failure to address what is dubbed in our country as the twin pandemic to gender-based violence, as well as violence against women and girls. We argue here that some of the identified impediments of rural women and girls to enjoy their basic universal human rights are as a direct result of the state's lack of capacity to address basic gender disparities in the workplace, in the community, in the church, in business, and all over in the context of South Africa. And so we believe that if South Africa's triple challenge of poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment and unemployment is to be addressed, rural women and girls need to own their own development and be placed in the center of their own development. And only when women and girls are empowered and developed will this kind of violence and the killing that we see in our country and in our region is happening. And so while we understand that the CEDAW, which is the Convention of Discrimination of all forms of discrimination against women and girls, is the UN General Assembly is an optional space, we are absolutely appalled at the level at which our government is unable and unwilling to ensure that there's high level of compliance with the CEDAW process. And so in this space, we seek to ensure that we know that South Africa is part of the changing geopolitics and the changing multilateral system. And so in these kind of spaces, we need to merge together. We merge together as the South, we merge together as developing countries, and we merge together as underdeveloped countries or third world countries in partnership with developed countries in such spaces as feminists to come together and say, enough is enough. There needs to be one compliance, and there needs to be a creation of networks of civil society that is going to ensure that in whatever space, particularly in like civil BRICS and the C20 And particularly in this space, there is coherence. South Africa, while is making efforts to comply with its obligation of the convention, little progress is made in terms of being regular and timeless in submitting country periodic reports. And so we need to ensure that there is that level of compliance. We need to ensure awareness raising and popularization of the importance of addressing gender-based violence. And so we come up with a number of recommendations. And I'd like to take the better part of the rest of this presentation to highlight just 6 recommendations. One, South Africa should ensure that in all multilateral institutions where it engages as a country, there has to be an expansion of the definition of gender and therefore gender-based violence. South Africa should do that, particularly in the G20. That there should be an acknowledgement of LGBTQI+ and those that are diverse. 2, as a country with the most active membership in the African context, there has to be a continued effort to ensure that the girl child is monitored, mentored, and protected against toxic masculinity and against patriarchy. 3, the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability in the presidency must develop gender transformative policies that are aimed at empowering women socioeconomically. A basic example is one of our traditional councils, policies, which talks to traditional councils and that do not embrace community-based organizations that put the woman and the girl child first. 4, an employable law needs to be developed that is aimed at promoting women's equal right to and access to land tenure, because land is a means of production. Once you are able to produce, once you are able to access funds, you are then able to better yourself. Finally, there needs to be an outlaw of discriminatory and harmful traditional practices amongst that promote abductions, forced marriages of women, girls, teenage pregnancies, and early child marriages. And so if you talk about women, access to services and gender-based violence, everything is a waste of time if the girl child is scared to leave her home to go to school because she's going to be abducted. Any kind of development is futile if the woman is not empowered to own her own development, plant in her own garden, create her own nutritious food, sell that produce and market it, agro-processes, export it, and create wealth for her own family. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the last intervention. It's the time of Sigi Aile from Ethiopia. Sigi is the founder and director of the Organization for Women in Self-Empowerment, a local non-governmental organization operating in Ethiopia. She worked for over 20 years at the Addis Ababa University, then joined ActionAid Ethiopia. Please, Sigi Aile, we have very not so much time. It's your turn.
Thank you, Annalisa. Thank you for inviting me to this event. And, I understand 5 minutes is very short, but I'll try to be within the given time. First, let me briefly highlight a few points on the broad situation of on gender, gaps on the African continent in general and Ethiopia in particular. Africa in general and Ethiopia in particular have made remarkable progress towards poverty reduction and gender-related issues, in the past decades. However, inclusive growth remains unachieved. In Ethiopia, 80% of the population lives in rural areas. This is opposite Brazil, as I heard it earlier. On the other hand, the recognition of the importance of gender equality and women's empowerment is reflected by governments, multilateral institutions, donors, etc., at a much higher level than before. This is evident. And the other point is gender gaps have been identified, in many factors, in access to services, food insecurity, education, employment, and the like. And the other point I want to raise is there have been many commitments and declarations that have been made by governments. For instance, zero hunger by 2025 by the African Union, reduction of poverty, by the governments, closing gender gaps and the like. And with respect to gender-based violence, it's still a critical issue in many countries, including, my own Ethiopia. And the other thing is we have now, more than ever, evidence available in many cases, like, for instance, I can cite, studies by the World Bank, studies by governments, studies by the AU, UN Women, it's by civil society organizations, and there are plenty of evidence. Having said this, let me, dwell upon three key challenges that affect the women's access to services as well as the gender-based violence. The first one is insufficient enabling environment. It is true that policies are there by governments, investments. However, when it comes to implementation, it's an issue. Investment, legal framework, accountability systems are not adequate. And the other thing is infrastructure, rural infrastructure, water, energy, roads. These are very critical to rural women, but they are in short supply. Inadequate services like healthcare, education, technology. These are, well, very, 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 constrained, very, in short supply. The social norms, the gender-based violence, particularly, in my country, there is evidence that 34% of women experience, one or more kind of violence by their especially intimate partner in their lives. Customs, low education. In terms of education, there are huge gaps. For instance, in Ethiopia, 95% of girls go to join the primary education, but it's about 53% that complete, the primary education, and it's only 30% that join the tertiary education. And the other challenge is the insufficient political will. For instance, in allocating budget, for availing, gender responsive services, for addressing gender-based violence, for empowering, women and girls. This is it. The second point is in the, relates to the capacity of institutions on gender and the weak women's agency. This is, I think, everywhere, weak capacity of institutions in gender in rural areas, in particular, a weak voice in place in government and politics, demanding women's individual and collective capacity and agency, household gender relations, constraining, to women. This is connected with the social norms, with the culture of, the society, lack of productive assets for women, lack of financial, knowledge and skills building services, and inadequate infrastructure again. And the third challenge that I would like to raise is access to resources and services in general. The social norms that themselves, constrain, access to resources and services to women and girls, lack of productive assets, lack of financial.
Please, Sigi, close your intervention because the time at our disposal is finishing.
Okay. Opportunities, there is gender discourse, there is government commitments, growing coverage of mass media, growing evidence by different national and international actors. One recommendation that I would like to forward is the creation of an enabling environment that promotes accountability, respect to commitments, and gender budgeting with respect to closing gender gaps. In particular, I'd like to recommend education, both formal and informal, to women and girls. That said, I thank you very much. Being the last speaker, I think I'm constrained with time. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm through.
Thank you, Ziggy Eiler, for this intervention. Now it's the turn of Mabel Bianco, President of FEIM, Fundación para Estudio e Investigación de la Mujer, and coordinator of the Gender Working Group, who should close this panel, very interesting panel discussion with multiple voices from all over the world.
Thank you, Annalisa, and thank you to all of you for the great participations. And of course, as usual, the time is short, and it's a pity because they were such good presentations. But the proposal from our gender working group in the C20 with Maria Grazia Panunzi, we hope to have these at least side event to present the big problems the women living in rural areas are having, and how we need to work to include the issue in the G20 discussions on working. I want to remember that in 2018 in Argentina, when the president was Argentina, we included it. But later on, it was not a decision to have it. Now we hope in Indonesia, we are going to have some issue dedicated to rural women. And we try to continue working on that on the C20. Of course, we are not going to be the coordinators, but we are going to continue being with Maria Grazia, members of the C20 and the Gender Working Group, and we hope we can push from them to have the issue. I don't need to say how clear was after these great presentations the reality and the problems of the rural women. So please, let's work to improve them and push the G20 head of states to consider also women in rural areas, including indigenous. Thank you so much, and I hope all of you have a good morning, night, afternoon, whatever it is. And thank you, Annalisa, for your moderation. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all our panelists. And our time is finishing, unfortunately, and we greet everyone and we thank the organization who are supporting this process. Thank you.
Bye.